Now, I am aware that the podcast is running a little bit long by this point, and I do apologize for that, but this wouldn't be a proper 100 Degrees podcast unless we did take some time to talk about some MMA. So let's take just a couple of minutes here to talk about Khabib Nurmagomedov. You wouldn't believe it, but we are still talking about Khabib's retirement this long after he actually pulled the pin on it. And really the reason for that is that Dana White just is not willing to let the whole thing go. He seems bound and determined to get Khabib back for at least one more fight. I suppose to at least get him to 30-0. But I have to be real with you. I think that it just isn't going to happen. And to give you an explanation as to why, you almost have to reel back a little bit to last week when I was talking about Khabib, I was talking about Jon Jones, and I was talking about Israel Adesanya, and I was talking about the quest to become known as the greatest of all time. Now, there are some questions about whether or not Khabib is legitimately a contender for that title, and I do recognize that. But there's this question about what it is that's going to bring Khabib Nurmagomedov back to the octagon if he ever comes back at all. And the one thing that everybody has kind of clued in on is that it isn't going to be money. And I think the other thing that it obviously isn't going to be is it isn't going to be glory. Because if he wanted that, he could have just continued his career. He could have turned around and he could have gone through all of the guys at lightweight again. He could have waited for some of the new stars that are still coming up that he hasn't faced yet, or even some of the other guys that are already stars that he hasn't faced yet. He could move to another weight division. There's any number of things that Khabib Nurmagomedov could do if glory was the thing that motivated him. If his ego was the thing that motivated him, there are all kinds of ways that he could continue to satisfy his ego. Now, a few weeks ago, actually quite a long time ago, I talked about Sugar Sean O'Malley. And I questioned his scale of values. Or at least what his scale of values at least seemed to be at one particular point. And so the scale of values, I think, is something that comes into question with Khabib Nurmagomedov. In fact, I think it comes into question with any of these fighters who are currently in what I would call the GOAT sweepstakes. And as it just so happens, Khabib Nurmagomedov has a very strong scale of values. Because he did figure out something that he valued more than he valued his ego, and that turned out to be his mother's love. She asked him, she said to him, please don't fight anymore now that your father's gone, because I don't want to see you get hurt. And he almost, I like to imagine this, like he's a, like he's a low-level mafia character in one of these mafia movies. He must have been like, yes, mama. And the only thing is that, I suppose that if he wanted to tell his mom yes and then go back and have another fight, he could probably do that, but he can't keep it secret. It's not like in one of these mafia movies where they can just say, yes, mama, and then go out in secret and continue to do the things that their mama didn't want them to do. If he goes out and he does this again, it's going to be on TV. It's not going to be a secret. And so Khabib, it is this simple. He loves his mom. He loves his mom more than he loves his own ego. And that's the reason why I don't think we're going to see him in a UFC octagon again. Now, Jon Jones, there's an interesting situation. Because I think at this point we have to ask ourselves, is there anything that Jon Jones loves more than his own ego? Oh, that's a tough question. The one thing that seems to be standing in his way, between himself and a fight at heavyweight before just trying to get a title shot, it really seems to be the money. He's been squabbling with the UFC over money, so, perhaps he loves money more than he loves his own ego. But at the same time, it seems to me like for a fighter, the amount of money that you can command for a fight is kind of like an extension of your own ego. So maybe that's not it. And we are talking about a fighter who loves his ego so dearly that he actually came out and complained when he was no longer the #1 ranked pound-for-pound fighter in the world, despite the fact that at that point he had been inactive for more than a year. If you ask me, I think that it was a shock that they had ever left Jon Jones at #1 pound-for-pound for that long at all. How can you be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter if you're not active? That's a strange one. Really, I think that we can only all hope that Jon Jones does have somebody in his ear who's trying to get his ego under check. Really, I think at this point, all we can really hope for is that Jon Jones does have somebody in his ear trying to get his ego under control. I mean, because for a professional fighter, in any particular discipline, for a professional fighter, your ego is actually the most dangerous thing to you. And it only gets more dangerous as you reach the end of your career. There is something that is said about fighters. And they talk about this when it comes time for a fighter to quit. And they say that a fighter never listens to somebody who tells him he should quit. The only thing that he ever answers to, the only thing he ever listens to is another fighter's fists. Khabib Nurmagomedov loves his mother enough that he has granted her request. When you think about it, it was basically her request that she never had to see her son go through that particular experience. And personally, I would posit to you that really for Jon Jones, the best time for him to find something that he loves more than his own ego is right now. Because there are many places in the world where you can go and many things in the world that you can do where it would be less disastrous to find out that your ego has compromised you than fighting at heavyweight.